It would terrify. Oh my God, an unlikely killer, an unlikely victim.
He got bleeding to death out here.
Twists and turns.
Yeah, he had a hat on, and it almost like a beard.
Bombshells galore. It was just stranger than fiction.
The shooter came across the parking lot and raised his arm. Pow, 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 pow.
Initially, people have no idea what's happening, right? They think it's just some lone gunman.
This person was targeted for some reason.
A young father of two senselessly murdered, dropping his child off.
Everyone was scratching their heads. Why was Rusty Snyderman murdered?
After the shooting, the suspect took off in that minivan and sped off.
What did you notice right away about him?
His black beard didn't belong. I mean, it was just, I knew it was a fake beard. It just didn't make sense to me. It just seemed too elaborate and too Hollywood.
There were some previous incidences that were very odd.
He's running. I think he has a gun in his back pocket, and now he's running away. I don't know who the hell he is, and I don't want him by my house. And then all of a sudden, the entire investigation shifted.
That had to be pretty disturbing.
Looked over Rusty and I said, I'm going to get the justice for you. Hopefully get your revenge.
On a clear day with a bird's eye view, you can see all the way to Atlanta. Its big city problems in the distance. Here in Dunwoody, Georgia, crime and danger seem to be somebody else's problem. Until one November morning, this suburban bubble is about to burst with a bang.
It was a beautiful fall day right before Thanksgiving. People were running their morning errands. Parents were dropping their kids off to preschool.
One of those parents is Rusty Snyderman, who's on his way back to his car after dropping off his 2-year-old son.
Witnesses told police they saw a silver minivan pull up. A man hopped out, walked up to Rusty, didn't say a word to him.
Walked up, he turned around. Pow, 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 pow.
I heard a couple loud pops and looked up and looked over and saw right in front of me shooting Rusty.
Shot him several times.
I mean, it was pretty much point blank range.
The barrel was either at or right at his skin when fired. There was actually soot deep into the wound from the projectile.
And then calmly and coolly walked back to his vehicle and took off.
It was almost surreal, the experience. There was no chaos or running or yelling or anything. He just walked back to his van. It didn't look like what I would think a murder would be.
They thought it was a movie. They were actually looking around for the cameras.
Everybody thinks they know what they would do. You don't.
Somebody shot and killed.
Which way did it go?
He headed east, Mount Vernon.
Mount Vernon Road?
Yeah, he had a hat on, and it almost like a beard.
Was he black, white, Hispanic?
I can't tell. He might have been.
It came over radio that there was a shooting. There was one person down, unknown status, and we all just went.
Oh my God,
Somebody records a video. A doctor who happens to be nearby performs CPR, and a teacher grabs the children to get them out of harm's way.
There were a lot of witnesses to the shooting. Everybody saw it happen. The shooter made no effort to conceal themselves.
Honestly, when the call came out, I was shocked. In Dunwoody, everybody's pretty nice and everybody helps each other. So for something like this to happen, it was just a shocker.
The community was absolutely scared. Again, it's not something that happens normally. There's not a lot of violent crime in that area at all.
Bleeding to death out here.
The police and the ambulance are on their way.
He didn't look conscious to me. He looked like he was struggling and trying to, there was some movement, but I knew that it wasn't good.
There was a lot of blood everywhere. There were obvious gunshots to the patient. There was no pulse, and he was unresponsive. But that does not mean that you don't work this patient, because there have been times where we've been able to save patients.
He was white, mostly Hispanic. I would say he's about 5'9", 5'10". He's got a baseball cap on. It's a silver Caravan, almost looks like a Dodge. He had a hat on. It looked like he had a beard and a silver caliber gun.
Let me know when the officer gets right there with the patient.
And who? Everybody.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
So we did notify surrounding agencies.
I started hearing rumblings about a shooting not far from where I live, probably about a 10-minute drive from my house. And That in and of itself was shocking because it's a very safe community.
Let's go now to Counselor Mike Pachinik with the latest on what he's learned. Mike.
At the time of Rusty Snyderman's murder, I was a reporter at WSB-TV in Atlanta.
I'm Mike Pachinik, Channel 2 Action News.
His murder happened that morning. I came in the afternoon and was assigned to go back to try to find people who knew Rusty, knew his family, try to get to the bottom of who he was and why somebody would want him murdered.
How did you first learn about the Snyderman shooting?
It was
in the news,
Yeah, it was all over the news. A husband is shot and killed right after he drops his child off.
This shooting has shaken the school and the community to its core.
The last thing you think about is dropping off your child at school and something like this happened.
Very, 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 very scary to happen.
Tragic. Every parent is scared. Every parent who's got a young child in daycare is scared. They didn't know what the motive was. So it was big news in Atlanta.
To me, honestly, it looked like it was professional. It was just the calmness of it. It didn't seem like it was a crime of passion. It was just very cold and calculated.
The shooting did happen at close range. There was no indication that Rusty was going to do anything or was trying to attack the person. It was a purely one-sided shooting, and close range to me said it was personal.
Right now, they are out actively searching for the man that shot this father. Rusty Snyderman's car was parked right there where you see that orange spray paint.
Well, it looks like a hit. You know, happened in broad daylight with witnesses around.
I absolutely didn't believe at any point that it was a random shooting.
It was somebody that looked like targeted him on purpose.
In the time it takes to count to 4, the innocence of a schoolyard, backpacks, snacks, goodbyes, shrouded in gun smoke, and now mystery.
The school and several of the businesses in this complex do have security cameras. Dunwoody police tell me right now they are actively looking at that video to see if they can get a better description of the suspect.
Initially, people have no idea what's happening, right? They think it's just some lone gunman?
No one could come up with a motive. Random shooting at a daycare center right after a child has been dropped off. This person was targeted for some reason, but nobody knew what that reason was.
Still ahead, the clue you couldn't miss. What did you notice right away about him?
Well, I noticed his black beard.
The gunman's less than brilliant disguise.
Didn't belong. I mean, it was just, I knew it was a fake beard.
Now at Dunwoody Prep, you were here, what was 14 years ago, I guess it was. Former Detective Andrew Thompson takes me back to the scene of the crime, just outside Atlanta. You think the shooter was parked over here?
Yeah, witnesses had the shooter park over here. As Rusty came around this way, he came around the front of his car, and he turned to open the door. The shooter came across the parking lot and raised his arm, pow, 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 pow.
Rusty Snyderman had dropped off his child, and as he was exiting, he was shot multiple times by an unknown assailant who jumped in his vehicle and fled the scene.
This was a huge case in Atlanta, and especially since it happened in the parking lot of a preschool, you know, a young father of 2 senselessly murdered, dropping his child off.
Just shocked at what that happened here. This shooting has shaken the school and the community to its core.
I was just in disbelief. You know, you never expect murder to step into your life, and particularly somebody like Rusty. I not only didn't know of any enemies that Rusty had, I couldn't imagine him having an enemy because he was such a positive person.
It was my first homicide. I didn't really know what to expect when I came up, but I just clicked right into professional mode and remembered all the steps that I needed to take that I learned back in the academy.
You started organizing, you start putting things in motion for witnesses and evidence, but you do something unusual. You bend down to the victim.
Yeah, after I got everybody where I thought they should be and got the base information, I came back over and I looked over Rusty and I said, I'm going to get the justice for you. I'm going to get this guy and hopefully get your revenge. I wanted to assure him that I was going to do the best that I could to bring the killer to justice. And I said, have faith. And I went and started doing my job.
I was tasked with going back and trying to just dig into the family a little bit, find out who they were and where they worked, what sorts of things were important in their lives.
He had a very outgoing personality. He was very engaging. He was very funny. He was fun to be with.
Rusty always had a lot of friends. That goes to Rusty's personality. Rusty would leave an indelible mark on people. He had a personality that always would bring you in.
And tell me about the family and what you learned later on about them.
Rusty and Andrea started dating in college.
The two met at Indiana University at a retreat for Jewish students.
By all accounts, they had a fairy tale romance, and when they finished school, Rusty got an opportunity to get his MBA at Harvard.
They had lived together for 7 years.
They'd been together a long time before they got married, and she was just part of the family then.
They were a good team. She presents very warm, gives you a huge embrace. So, yeah, I had a good feeling about them.
They had a good marriage. They had 2 young kids. They had a beautiful home. They had a wonderful life. They had a lake house where they spent their weekends.
I've never seen him happier than being a dad. He was a big kid at heart himself, and he just adored his kids.
He was so natural. He just naturally had the skill to connect with them, and he would sit on the floor and play with them. And not everyone has that natural ability, but he really did.
Rusty getting a lot more time with the kids because Andrea has taken a demanding new job. There's lots of travel. Florida, Colorado, even to Europe.
She was feeling good about it. I think she liked it. I think she was challenged. It was a good change for their family, so I was happy for them.
Police begin to look, of course, at the family as they begin to investigate this case. What did they discover about the couple? Are they happy? Are there struggles?
There was no indication of any strife in the home life. Your typical successful, upper middle class, hardworking couple.
Now investigators turn back to that security camera video of the bearded killer in the minivan.
The key point of evidence we had was the daycare has a camera there that overlooks the central parking lot. And that was the only visual that we had of the suspect's vehicle driving around once, then coming back around again.
It's a silver Caravan, almost looked like a Dodge. He had a hat on, it looked like he had a beard, and a silver caliber gun.
Witnesses told police that they saw a silver minivan pull up to the scene, and after the shooting, the suspect took off in that minivan and sped off.
2 odd things about that van. 1, witnesses say the license plate was missing. And 2, when detectives rewind, they see that same minivan cruising the parking lot an hour before the shooting. So that morning, you pull in right here?
Yeah.
Larry Minogue was dropping off his son that morning. It was about an hour before the shooting.
As I was pulling into the parking lot, I noticed a van going in front of the building.
What did you notice right away about him?
Well, I noticed his black beard, and I could tell, as far as how dark it was, that it didn't belong. I mean, it was just, I knew it was a fake beard.
Larry says he even scolded the man.
I just looked at him and said, you don't belong here. You shouldn't be driving through this part of the parking lot at this hour.
Did he acknowledge you?
No.
Only later that morning does Larry realize that he'd come that close to a killer.
I hear it on the radio. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, I think I saw that person.
That had to be pretty disturbing.
Well, it was, and then I just called the Dunwoody Police Department, and they said, can you come by?
Police release a sketch based on Larry's description. It's shown everywhere.
The thing that really struck me was they all noted that this was a really strange-looking beard on the suspect, and that it looked fake.
Some people described it like an Abraham Lincoln beard.
Yeah, he had a hat on, and it almost like a beard.
A manhunt now underway for the bearded killer. And why was Rusty Snyderman calling 911 just a week before his murder? Was there an earlier attempt on his life?
He's running. I think he has a gun in his back pocket, and now he's running away. I don't know who the hell he is, and I don't want him by my house.
Everyone was scratching their heads. Why was Rusty Snyderman murdered?
They were really focused on chasing down any lead they got because at the time they had no credible information as to who had done this.
We got a lot of leads. Everybody was fielding phone calls for leads, and because you you put something out like that, especially where the public is very interested, and you're going to get a lot of calls.
In fact, a detective from across the country calls to compare notes about his case involving the murder of a Jewish woman just 2 days before Rusty's killing.
One of the most prominent publicists of the Stars, Ronnie Chasen, was murdered, shot behind the wheel of her Mercedes in Beverly Hills.
Investigators are working on the theory that this was a planned attack.
The detective from Beverly Hills, California, gave me a call, and he was working a case that also involved people from the Jewish community, and he thought it was worthwhile for him to give me a call to see if there might have been a connection.
I know I got a call from the sheriff of a local county, Putnam County, that had a couple that was killed at their lake house. And so he called to see if there was some kind of connection. Of course, there was no connection. So it does bring out a lot of those kind of maybe similar cases that people are, searching for a lead on their case.
Then there's the tip from a woman so convinced she spotted the man's sketch that she follows him.
When police put out the picture of the minivan and the composite sketch of the shooter, a woman at a nearby grocery store thought she saw the killer and started taking pictures to try to help police catch this person.
According to police, the woman tails the man into the store and back out into the parking lot, secretly snapping photos with her phone.
And as it turned out, it was not the killer. He had an airtight alibi.
With any investigation, they always want to start by finding out whatever they can about the victim. And so in this case, they dug into where Rusty had worked, what sort of business ventures he was involved in.
We spoke to his business partners.
Some detectives thought the murder looked like the work of a hitman, a murder for hire, possibly related to one of Rusty's past jobs.
We also looked into his wealth management job that he had briefly. That was could be a great indicator as to a motive for it. If you're a multimillionaire and you end up losing millions of dollars, that could really flip a switch in somebody and want to get revenge on you.
Police quickly realized that this was not a business deal gone bad. They had no evidence to show that Rusty owed anybody money or that he had mishandled anybody's finances, so they pretty much put that to bed.
It just didn't make sense to me. It just seemed too elaborate and too Hollywood, if you know. And Rusty's not the kind of guy that's going to get in any kind of trouble. No criminal history, no anything.
Then this puzzling revelation. In the weeks before he was killed, Rusty Snyderman had called the police for help, not once, but twice.
If they can't emergency 911, what's the address of the emergency?
There were some previous incidences that were very odd.
About a month before Rusty Snyderman was killed, something strange happened at his house.
My garage door's open. We're concerned there may be somebody in the garage or in the house. My wife and I are both upstairs and my kids are in bed.
They were panicking a little bit that somebody was trying to break into the house.
Okay, relax. There's nothing to freak out about. The police are here,
Then, about a week before his murder, Rusty calls 911 again. This time, it's more serious.
There was another incident where Rusty was starting to leave his home to go about his day, and he saw somebody behind his air conditioner on the side of his house.
And he notices a gentleman laying down beside his house.
When he confronted the guy ran away down towards the end of the cul-de-sac.
He's running. I think he has a gun in his back pocket, and now he's running away. I don't know who the hell he is, and I don't want him by my house.
In the middle of that call, you could hear Rusty pausing to attend to his son.
I know, but I didn't get your water bottle. I'm sorry. He was wearing a hat and earmuffs, black mustache.
Odd, sure, but a lot of people have guns, and so that's not a direct indicator that the person was looking to kill Rusty.
Police respond to both calls and investigate, but no arrests are made.
It's another clue as part of our investigation, trying to determine, is that related to the fact that he was shot, or is it unrelated? We don't know at that particular point in time.
About a month after the murder, investigators catch a break, uncovering the biggest clue in this entire investigation. A 4,000-pound clue, essentially.
Yeah.
That was probably the biggest clue they had in terms of figuring out who did this.
And that's, probably, as far as leads go, our top lead.
And then all of a sudden, the entire investigation shifted.
When they hit on that ended up being a goldmine for them.
Words. But Police Chief Billy Grogan and his team will settle for just one clue hidden in those crime scene photos. Anything that leads to the man in the sketch, the black-bearded killer who shot Rusty Snyderman and then escaped in a silver minivan.
Any sort of serious crime like this, you start with the closest people to the victim and work your way out.
Investigators speak with Rusty Snyderman's wife, Andrea, several times.
Do you know anybody that drives a silver van?
No, I don't know anyone else that owns a silver minivan.
When they begin looking into this case, police talk to Andrea. What do they learn from her?
Andrea is totally baffled. She doesn't know who would kill her husband, why her husband would be killed. She's very distraught.
So the day after the shooting, Detective Thompson is asking Andrea to try to think of anybody who would have done this. Maybe an enemy of her husband? Somebody with a romantic interest in her?
Has there been anybody recently, when I say recently, within the past year, that has expressed an interest in you?
Yes.
Who?
My boss.
Your boss?
Yes.
Andrea says her boss had made a pass at her and that she turned him down, and that was that.
This is not an individual that would do something like this.
In a follow-up interview the next week, Detective Thompson wants more details.
Let's talk about your boss. How did he approach you with expressing an interest?
We traveled for business together, and we were at dinner, and he said, he thinks I'm fantastic, would love to have a relationship with me, but knows that that's probably unlikely, and that was sort of,
So it was a very polite,
very.
come on.
He really respected me as a person.
Andrea tells him that she and her boss remained on good terms, that they continued to work closely together.
We're close friends, he and I. Even once he said that, and I said no. We work together a lot, travel together a lot. I admire him as a professional. I enjoy learning from him.
As for the idea of her husband cheating on her, according to Andrea, it was laughable.
He doesn't have time to go to the bathroom, let alone have an affair. And he loved me so much and made that clear 1,000,000 times a day. So I laugh because it's
so absurd.
It's absurdly ridiculous.
Detectives now turn back to those ghostly security camera images, the killer's minivan. There's surveillance video that reveals a silver minivan.
Yes.
A 4,000-pound clue, essentially.
Yeah.
The van was the only solid evidence I had of the suspect. I looked at that video so many hours and so many days on my computer just trying to find the fingerprint on that van that'll make it stand out.
How did they go about tracking down this van?
Well, we called the manufacturers of just about every minivan that was, looked similar.
First I went to Ford, I went to Dodge, I went to Honda. The last one I went to, which was a recommendation from one of our patrol officers, was Kia. But, I hadn't thought about Kia. So I went to the Kia dealership.
It was a 2011 Kia Sedona minivan.
The 2011 model of that Kia Sedona minivan had only recently become available.
There was right around 1,000 or so in the entire country. So that was a relief.
And it gets better. The number of 2011 Kia Sedonas sold in Georgia at the time is just a lucky 13.
We're calling every single person that owned one of these vans that's registered to. Everybody has an alibi. Nobody's in Atlanta. Nobody's in Dunwoody.
So detectives go back to that videotape. They get it enhanced, and they play it on a big screen TV.
The first time I played it, the first time I saw this were 2 stickers on the front windshield that were offset from each other. That was my fingerprint. So now I had to figure out, what the hell are those stickers?
There was a sticker in the window, and it looked like it possibly could be from a rental vehicle.
turns out that Kia Sedonas were a very popular enterprise rental vehicle. And so when they hit on that, that ended up being a goldmine for them.
So it was this particular rental car company that had this specific vehicle in their fleet.
This leads to another important discovery. By chance, the barcode stickers on the suspect's van had been applied incorrectly. They were offset differently than stickers on other enterprise vehicles.
So they ended up getting the list of all of the 2011 Kia Sedona minivans that were rented on that date and the names of all of the people who had them rented. When they went to the actual locations to look at them, they were able to figure out which van it was based on those stickers because they weren't properly placed. They were like ever so slightly off instead of being parallel across the windshield.
I asked my rental car company contact, hey, when you have this year, make, model vehicle come into any of your lots, let me know. He said, absolutely. And he gave me a call one day, hey, we have a vehicle that might be what you're looking for up in this lot in North Georgia.
Detectives find the windshield stickers match those on the van at the crime scene. And then, bingo. A search of the minivan turns up synthetic hairs, just like those from a costume beard.
Beard fiber would be good evidence because we had several witnesses who said it looked like the suspect was wearing a fake beard.
Police now have the getaway car driven by Rusty Snyderman's killer. And better, they have the name of the person who rented the vehicle. A man by the name of Hemi Newman.
Who had the van on that day? Hemi Newman. I think we found our guy. Don't know why yet, but we found our guy.
Detectives now have their suspect right where they want him, in their interrogation room.
It's as if I'm a suspect. You're a suspect. Are you a suspect?
Minivan, the man suspected of shooting Rusty Snyderman, is Hemi Newman. It's a name that doesn't ring a bell with police at first.
Now, we're hot on the trail of Hemi Newman. We had to find him. We had to talk to him, see what he wanted to say.
And detectives do what anybody else might do.
I Googled his name and found his LinkedIn resume.
Surprisingly, the suspect, Hemi Newman, is a big executive at GE in nearby Marietta. Then, lead detective Thompson gets a call from his bosses.
It's like, hey, we have Hemi. We're going back to the precinct. Meet us there. Great. So I rushed back to the precinct. By the time I got back, the sergeant and lieutenant were already in the interview room talking to Hemi.
Not many suspects bring an iPad to an interrogation room, but this one did.
You okay? You all right? It's unnerving to be in a room like this.
At the time, the Dunwoody Police Department is in an office tower, the kind of building where ordinarily an executive might feel right at home.
I want to get into the incident with Rusty on that day, November 18th.
You don't expect an executive with GE to be in our interview room, being interviewed about a homicide, but yet he was.
I'm going to talk to you about the day of the shooting, but as everybody else, I'm going to read you your rights on it. Your Miranda rights. Do I have to worry? I don't think so. I'm not worried.
Newman isn't under arrest. He's there voluntarily. But when police read him his rights, he hesitates.
You understand the lawyer? Do you need a lawyer? I don't know. This is what you need to ask yourself. These questions. Do you feel like asking you questions about Rusty? You know what?
Not at all, but
I have
reading me this, and I've never been in a situation like this.
The two detectives that were in there, him and another one, were obviously playing off each other, trying to get what they could out of Hemi Newman.
In the beginning, we wanted to see why he had the van.
I mean, this is not rocket science. You're a smart guy. You're not signing away your mortgage.
No, I'm not signing away my mortgage, but this is very uncomfortable.
You're in the business world. You see papers all the time.
I know, but you read Miranda rights, and it seems like it's as if I'm a suspect.
I know you're a suspect. Are you a suspect?
I don't think I need to be a suspect. I shouldn't be a suspect. There's no reason why I should be a suspect, but you're reading me my rights.
He was very calm. Unusually calm.
I want to know what happened on the 18th. I got to know.
Okay, and I was at work.
I think he was trying to find out what we knew as much as we were trying to find out what he knew.
Do you know why I'm calling you? For help.
I know.
So you answered my call
back.
Right, to help.
Okay.
And
getting rid of your Miranda rights isn't help. It's saying we can hold anything against you, and I don't know.
Initially, it's gathering a lot of information, but then it gets into the whole crux of the matter, and he's not admitting anything, denying it.
Hammy, this is what we got. We got that van on video the day Rusty shot. And I swear, the more I look at you, the more I see the person inside the van. I'm giving you every opportunity, man. I don't think things should have happened that way. You've got a heart, you've got a soul, man. You're not a criminal. Things just go wrong.
Executives are used to long meetings, but not like this one. A tiny room, one table, 2 detectives, a fuzzy video camera. It goes on for 5 hours.
You're here because that van was there. We know where. It was over there where Rusty got shot. Listen, look at me and don't doubt me. I'm telling you what happened. You got to admit to yourself what happened with that van. I'm telling you, you were there when Rusty got shot. Now, Hammy, you were there. I know you were. Hammy.
How do you know I was there?
Because it's on video. That van is on the video. The van was there. I've got it on video. You're at the parking lot. You're there with Rusty. The question is, why'd you shoot him? Why did it have to get done that way?
One investigator leaves the room and then comes back with photos of that rented minivan caught on camera at the crime scene.
This is the van, okay? And that's your van.
I don't know what to tell you. I'm telling you that
Hammy, look, man.
I'm not there.
As the interview went on, he was looking more and more guilty.
You're telling me you didn't do this? Hammy.
Hemi Newman admits that he had rented a 2011 Kia Sedona on November 18th, but he denies that he drove it to the daycare and murdered Rusty Snyderman.
Are you prepared to tell me now you're not the guy? Because you haven't said that yet. All afternoon, you have not said, I did not damn do it.
You sit here and crowd me. You come up with all this stuff. You're accusing me of something, and it was obvious from the beginning because I knew you guys were talking about the car that you're somehow implicating me in this whole thing.
Newman says he's got an alibi, that he was at work at GE the morning Rusty was murdered. But investigators aren't buying it.
At that point, we had all the evidence we needed to place him in the minivan, say that nobody else drove the minivan. I went out and got the arrest warrant for Hemi Newman.
Go ahead and stand up for me. Then explain to you what's taking place tonight. You've been placed under arrest for the murder of Mr. Snyderman. Yes.
At the same time, while we were finishing the interview, we were confident we had our guy, and we had a whole lot more work to do.
No, it's far from close. You need a probable cause to make an arrest. You need a lot more to get a conviction.
Police say they've got the man who shot Rusty Snyderman, but they still don't know why, what, or who could drive a man like Hemi Newman to kill.
The big question that hung over all of this is what could drive someone to commit murder?
It was becoming more and more clear that there was a lot more to the story.
Placed under arrest for murder of Mr. Snyderman.
Why would a late 50s executive wake up one day and kill somebody? Put a wig on and gun somebody down in a parking lot?
A young father of 2 senselessly murdered, dropping his child off.
This was national attention. You come back to a case that now is swarming.
This is what he did.
The man wanted someone else's wife, so he killed her husband.
The plan included me being there for Andrea after the fact.
He got caught, and all of a sudden he's insane.
I see dead people. They're telling me to kill people.
What was that all about? What was this description of a demon and an angel?
A demon that sounded like Barry White and an angel that sounded like Olivia Newton-John told him to do this? Like, come on.
We're talking about a self-proclaimed delusional individual who killed my husband.
How does she come across?
Not like a grieving widow.
Andrea Snyder, adulterer, liar, and master manipulator.
Where is the evidence that she was a party to the murder of her husband?
When investigators arrest Hemi Newman for gunning down Rusty Snyderman in this parking lot, the question so many are asking is why would a GE executive want to murder a father of two?
He got shot for one of greed, revenge, or lust.
Detectives think they've got their person, but they're searching for which of these age-old motives may have driven Hemi Newman to kill. And they discovered a curious connection between him and Rusty Snyderman's wife, Andrea.
What's your relationship with Andrea? Andrea and I are friends.
Hemi Newman was Andrea Snyderman's boss.
That same boss that Andrea had mentioned to investigators.
How did he approach you with expressing an interest?
He said, he thinks I'm fantastic, would love to have a relationship with me, but knows that that's probably unlikely.
You can only imagine our surprise, when we had the paperwork from Enterprise to Google your name and you're her boss.
During the interrogation with police, they pressed him on the nature of his relationship with Andrea Snyderman.
I find her attractive, and I indicated that to her. And I said, I'd like to continue to develop the relationship. And she basically said, no, I'm committed to Rusty, and that ain't gonna happen.
They began to learn that Hemi Newman's marital life was not great. In fact, at the time of the shooting, he had moved out of his home.
Problems in his marriage and Newman's attraction to Andrea Snyderman, all of this and a potential motive for Rusty's murder begins to take shape for police.
Jealousy gets in the heart. Envy takes over. The mind starts working. And that life looks a hell of a lot better than mine right now.
Hemi Newman may have confessed to his feelings for Andrea Snyderman, but when it comes to a confession about his connection to the shooting, that's a different story.
I was not there. I did not pull the trigger on the gun just for Rusty Snyderman.
At the end of the interview, our detectives arrested Hemi Newman.
You're arresting? That's what I'm saying.
After his arrest, Newman pleads not guilty to a charge of malice murder.
Myself and a detective went to Andrea's house to deliver the news that we had arrested the person who killed her husband.
We made an arrest on the case.
Are you serious?
We have.
Do you have the person in custody?
That's all I said. Anything else?
Who is it?
Keep on.
Are you kidding me? Please, no.
Hard to tell you, but it is.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
The Dunwoody police called me and said we'd made an arrest. And so I said, who? As soon as I knew his name, it just made my skin crawl.
The murder trial for Hemi Newman, the man accused of murdering a father outside his child's daycare center in Dunwoody, is moving fast on this very first day. All eyes are now on Courtroom 5D here in the DeKalb County Courthouse as Hemi Newman's trial is about to begin. But before opening statements, a big surprise. Newman now admits that he killed Rusty Snyderman, but says he's not guilty because he was mentally ill when he committed the crime.
All right.
All right, you may be seated. The state may proceed with its opening statement.
Boil it down to a sentence. The man wanted someone else's wife, so he killed her husband. He got caught. And all of a sudden he's insane.
At this point in time, the defense will have an opportunity to give you their opening statement.
This case is not about what happened. We know what happened. This case is about why. Hemi was like a puppy in love. He felt that he and Andrea were like soul mates.
Even though Hemi Newman has now admitted to firing the gun that killed Rusty Snyderman, prosecutors still need to lay out their case. So they begin by tracking his movements the day of the shooting, beginning with his morning at GE before sunrise.
So he's up in his office at 5:30 something. Turns on his computer, does a few things, and without using the elevator, exits. Defendant used the stairs and went out and unmanned back the cameras in the employee parking garage. They caught the defendant leaving in the silver Sedona Kia van.
Prosecutors argue that just 2 hours after Hemi Newman shot and killed Rusty Snyderman, he fills up his rental car with gas, returns it, and then heads back to work in his own car.
We even got video on there. Dressed the same as he arrived at the plane.
Chris Lang, CHRI.
Then prosecutors called Chris Lang to the stand. He was in the parking lot that morning, and in a dramatic display, DA Robert James demonstrates how Snyderman was shot.
There's a person that just comes out of nowhere and shoots him several times.
If you're laying on your stomach, okay. With your head towards me, okay. Where you are there, the shooter would have been right here.
We never did find the weapon that was used, but I guess we had the next best thing.
Say your name for the record.
My name is Jan Da Silva.
Jan Da Silva was important in the trial as well.
Yeah, Jan was able to connect the dots because we could show that it looks like he committed the murder, but we didn't have a murder weapon.
Can you tell us where you actually listed the gun? There was a website.
Mr. Da Silva said he'd sold a Bersa 40 caliber Thunder pistol. I showed him the lineup, and he immediately identified Hemi Newman as the person he sold the gun to.
Do you know who the person was that contacted you? Yes, sir. What was his name? Hemi Newman.
I asked him, do you still have the test fire casing that comes with the gun when they sell it to you?
Typically, after somebody buys a gun, it comes with what's called a test fire casing, a spent bullet that essentially proves that the gun has been tested and works properly. Jan Da Silva said he actually had given that casing to his girlfriend, and luckily for investigators, she still had it. Prosecutors say that souvenir shell casing matches the bullet casings found at the crime scene, linking the gun to the murder.
What would have been about a week after he sold the gun to Hemi, Hemi came back up to the restaurant where Jan Da Silva was working as a valet.
He started off by saying, don't ever have a mistress.
Don't ever have a mistress.
Yes, sir.
And Newman tells Jan Da Silva something else about that gun he'd recently sold him.
He told me he just tossed it on the Lake Lanier, and that he was okay because he made sure that it was tossed somewhere where nobody can find it.
What does this all begin to tell them about Hemi Newman?
This was a massive cover-up.
Hi, Mr. Deputy. We're in recess till tomorrow morning.
A well-planned cover-up and proof, according to prosecutors, that Hemi Newman was very much in his right mind when he planned this murder. But now his trial is about to take a truly bizarre turn, one that includes some of the world
in the so-called daycare murder trial. A Georgia man accused of gunning down his romantic rival.
Tell me how intense this was. This was national attention.
It's the most intense case I've ever been involved with, and I've tried high-profile cases.
Bring him out, jury, please.
The prosecution painted Hemi Newman as a lying, cheating man who was faking his mental illness, who wanted Rusty Snyderman out of the picture so that he could marry Andrea Snyderman, take their money and her children, and ride off into the sunset.
Hemi was broke. All those things came out. In his interrogation, he was unhappy in his relationship with his wife.
You have all these expenses, and we have no money. I told my wife, we don't have any money. We're broke.
The defense, meantime, painted a picture of a troubled man with undiagnosed bipolar disorder who had a traumatic childhood.
The answer of why in this case, it actually begins with Hemi's father.
His father was a concentration camp survivor. Very difficult man, very distant man, not very loving. Our belief was because of his bipolar disorder, he didn't have the capacity to know right from wrong at the time of the shooting of Rusty Snyderman.
To counter that argument, the state shows jurors videos of two different evaluations of Hemi Newman with a court-appointed psychiatrist.
What I've been told that I need to do, and that's that Rusty needs to die.
And this is where the trial takes a truly bizarre turn.
During the summer of 2010, the defendant claims that he was visited by a 6-foot dark demon. Also, he claims a 6-foot bright white angel came to him.
Is it a low voice, a high voice?
A deep voice.
Very white.
That's right. According to Newman, the demon in his head sounds like the R&B legend behind hits like Never Never Gonna Give You Up, seen here on pop music TV show Pop Pop. Then there's the voice of the angel.
The Australian lady in Greece, what's her name?
Yes. That's the best way he could describe it so that we could understand what he was saying.
What was that all about?
There are essentially two ways you can be acquitted if you commit a crime and you claim that you're insane. One way is what we call the right from wrong test, that you were so far gone that you don't understand the difference between right and wrong. The other way, which was the centerpiece of this trial, is that you were suffering from a delusion that compelled you to do the act.
When he comes, I think he's real. Okay. Do you think he's real now? But what do you think he is now? I'm talking to you and sort of analyzing it. Yeah. Probably not.
Hemi Newman's defense says that part of his psychosis was a belief that Rusty Snyderman's children were actually his, and that he needed to kill Rusty to protect them.
The plan included me being there for Andrea after the fact.
Okay.
It wasn't only killing Rusty, but also the protection and being there for the children.
Hemi's goal in shooting Rusty was to save Rusty's children from the same kind of torment that he himself experienced as a child. He thought he was doing the right thing by killing Rusty to save his children.
And during those recorded interviews, Newman makes some surprising allegations about his relationship with Andrea.
We get us another very briefly, it's very brief because that was it. And then I told her, I said, you're going to regret this.
Newman also discusses a business trip he says he took with Andrea, where he claims they ended up alone in a hotel room watching a movie together.
I was already pretty late. She found out my pajamas, I found my pajamas, and we decided to watch the movie in bed. And we became into that. And you had troubles. No. And then I went back to the bed.
Andrea denies this ever happened, and Newman continues to maintain that he and Andrea never had a sexual relationship. But prosecutors think there could have been another motive: money.
Rusty Snyderman had a couple $1 million life insurance policy that really became a focal point for investigators.
He wanted Rusty's life, and he wanted Rusty's wife. He wanted the money because they're wealthy. The house was paid for. I think the house at the time was worth almost $1 million.
State calls Andrea Snyderman, Judge.
It's becoming clear that at this trial, there's one person everybody wants to hear from.
Do you have any idea why the defendant would have these feelings toward you?
I think I'm a pretty nice person.
And when Andrea Snyderman takes the witness stand, it's a very hot seat.
Do you know why Mr. Newman would have emailed a friend that you finally gave in?
No, I don't. We're talking about a self-proclaimed delusional individual who killed my husband.
Would testify in Hemi Newman's trial. But the star witness, undeniably, is Rusty Snyderman's widow, Andrea. Once she takes her seat here, things quickly turn hostile.
State calls Andrea Snyderman, Judge. Did the defendant ever express his feelings for you?
Yes.
Do you have any idea why the defendant would have these feelings toward you?
I think I'm a pretty nice person. I'm a very caring person.
Were you and the defendant romantically involved?
No.
But for the next 2 days, the nature of Andrea Snyderman's relationship with her boss takes center stage at trial. Prosecutors going over details about their business trips together, reading from some very unbusiness-like emails between them.
It's about how you felt when we looked at the stars in Tahoe, when we woke up Friday morning in Denver, when we walked out of the restaurant on Thursday, when you took my hand and nestled your head on my shoulder.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Did that happen?
Did what happen?
Did you wake up together in Denver and Tahoe?
No.
Even so, Andrea testifies that when she and her boss traveled together, she allowed him into her hotel rooms 2 times. But she says that was before she realized Newman was stalking her.
Did he stalk you from inside your own room?
Stalking can take on many different meanings.
So that's a yes.
He was there to spend time with me.
In your room? In your room?
Yeah, he did not share a room with me. Was he in my room? Might have been for a little while, but didn't share a room with me.
And whether Andrea recognized it or not, it seemed that Newman's behavior was becoming more and more unpredictable. Remember that 911 call Rusty made to police about a strange man lurking outside his home?
I don't know who the hell he is, and I don't want him by my house.
Turns out, that was Hemi Newman, an admission he eventually made during one of his mental health evaluations.
I told Hemi, I told like 6 other people also what happened on the side of my house, because it was bizarre and scary.
Normally, when you're called as a prosecution witness, you're there to help their case. They treat you nicely. They treated her as a hostile witness from the get-go.
I had no choice but to continue my career and my job.
Andrea Snyderman was defiant because both sides were coming at her, full bore.
The stalker that you've now testified about, you picked him up at the airport.
Yeah.
You flew home with him.
That's correct.
You changed seats to sit next to him.
That's how we always travel.
In one of the emails, she talks to Hemi about feeling like she's betrayed her family and expressing remorse over actions.
Return to the second page of that email.
Yep.
Hemi Newman says, please never forget how much I love you. And how did you respond?
I know, but so do other people. I betrayed them all. I'm not trying to deal with that for now, but my burden, not yours.
What happened in Greenville, man?
We were holding each other's hands, and that's it. It may sound worse than it is, but to me, that was a betrayal.
So you're repenting in the email, at least, from holding his hand?
Yep.
She was pushing back on these allegations, and she wanted people to know unequivocally, I had nothing to do with this, I didn't have an affair, I didn't betray my husband, certainly didn't want him dead.
Do you know why Mr. Newman would have emailed a friend that you finally gave him?
No, I don't. We're talking about a self-proclaimed delusional individual who killed my husband. No, I don't question anything that he sent to anyone.
Here you have this widow of the victim adamantly saying that something did not happen, and yet both sides, the attorneys, were arguing that it did.
One witness after another takes the stand to testify about what they claim was the nature of the relationship between Hemi Newman and Andrea Snyderman. The jury even hears from a bartender in South Carolina who recalls serving the pair.
What stood out most was that he kept spinning her around to the salsa music. I know at one point she kind of was dancing for him. He pulled her back, groped her. They were groping each other, I know, because I kind of turned away.
At any time did you see the parties kiss?
Yes, I did.
How many times did they kiss?
I would say about 3 times.
Andrea is also asked about this trip, but she remembers certain details differently.
We had some drinks at the bar, maybe 1, 2.
Did you dance?
I got onto the dance floor myself.
Did you dance with the defendant?
He came to join, and there was a time where he reached out his hand and twirled me around, and that's it.
Did you kiss him or did he kiss you?
No. No.
Looking at her testimony, it was sort of hard to remember who was on trial.
Yeah.
Whether it was Andrea Snyderman or Hemi Newman.
Yeah.
You all went after her, and the defense went after her.
Yes. Yeah. We had to because we had to establish motive.
How does she come across to the jury?
Not like a grieving widow. Dishonest, disingenuous, a liar.
And there's something else that stands out for prosecutors, something they see as a discrepancy in Andrea's story about the day Rusty was shot.
Andrea Snyderman testified she didn't know Rusty had been shot until she got to the hospital.
The time you called Don Snyderman, at that time, did you know what had happened to Rusty?
No.
Okay.
I didn't know what happened to Rusty until I got to the emergency room.
Okay.
No one told me what happened to Rusty.
Rusty's own father and one of her friends testified that she called them to say that Rusty had been shot.
She called and said Rusty had been shot. She was so sorry. And then she was going to Dunwoody Prep to find out what had happened.
And are you sure that she told you that Rusty had been shot?
Yes, sir.
She immediately screaming to me that Rusty had been shot and she didn't know if he was dead or alive and she was on the way to the hospital.
Again, Andrea denies that happened. And that same friend also testified about what she knew about Andrea's relationship with Hemi Newman.
Did Andrea admit or deny an affair with her boss at that time after the murder? Based on all the time you've known Andrea, based on your observations of her, her mannerisms, when she told you No. Did you believe her?
No, but my heart really wanted to.
And when Citron leaves the stand, there's another unforgettable moment in the courtroom.
Andrea went up and hugged her friend, who had just testified that she didn't believe her when she said she wasn't having an affair. So it was very strange.
It was so jarring that the attorneys made a motion to have her removed from the courthouse, and the judge obliged and barred her from the rest of the trial.
With all the allegations swirling around Andrea Snyderman, the question so many are asking, is the grieving widow on her way to becoming a criminal defendant?
It's clear to me that Andrea is covered in Rusty's blood.
Everybody was wondering.
Hemi Newman, to kill a man outside of that Georgia daycare depends on who you believe.
The murder trial for Hemi Newman is moving fast.
The jury could have this case as early as tomorrow afternoon.
As prosecutors and defense lawyers begin final arguments in the case against Hemi Newman, the two sides have one thing in common. They're scathing accusations against Andrea Snyderman.
Both sides claimed that she was an evil woman who played a role in her husband's death.
Either the angel and the demon were talking to Hemi and telling Hemi to kill Rusty, with the demon that he was cheating with. The gun, in this case, was in Hemi's hand. But the trigger, I respectfully suggest, was pulled by Andrea Snyderman.
You had the defense team saying that she knew full well that Hemi Newman had mental illness, and she was sort of pushing him to do this. Even if she didn't expressly say, go kill my husband, her actions led him to do that.
Adulterer, liar, and master manipulator.
They were laying it all at her feet.
Yes, our theories were very, very close. They were saying she led him all the way up to it, but didn't necessarily plan it. And we were saying, yeah, she was the motive for it, but we believe she perhaps had something to do with it as well.
Hemi didn't hide his crime from Andrea because Andrea already knew.
As soon as this murder took place, she called Hemi Newman. She calls Hemi multiple times. On her way to the hospital, we thought that that was extremely odd behavior.
She told everybody that would listen that Rusty's been shot, but yet she wasn't told until she got to that hospital 2 hours later. The only way she would know that is if he told her.
Andrea says she called her boss for more innocent reasons, to tell him that something had happened to Rusty and that she'd left the office.
Rusty deserved to be treated with some respect and dignity. He did not deserve to be shot down in the street like some stray dog.
Robert James was forceful, he was loud, he would point.
This is what he did!
He was putting on a show, saying, no, he's lying about this mental illness. This was an affair. They both wanted him out of the picture.
They would have us believe that he's insane because he's having a good time at the club. And Andrea's doing this dance for him, and she's, and they're groping, and they're grinding, and they're getting it on, and they're kissing and hugging. He's having an affair. He's about to go back to the room and do the horizontal mumbo. What man in America wouldn't be like, woo, I'm about to have sex. It's great. Of course he's having a good time. If that makes him insane, then half the men walking down the street are insane.
Nobody is insane that plans a murder this way in the cover-up.
He knew he was wrong, and that makes him guilty, that makes him guilty, that makes him guilty all day, every day, because he is sane, and he knew the difference between right and wrong.
Any minute now, Judge Gregory Adams should bring the jury in for that verdict. There was never any question that he was going to be found guilty of something because he admitted to shooting Rusty Snyderman. The question was, would he be found guilty but mentally ill, or not guilty by reason of insanity?
Would he be sentenced to prison or to a mental hospital?
Deputy Moore, bring in the jury.
After deliberating for 8 hours, the jury is back with a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant as to count 1, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
We were devastated because he still goes into the prison system instead of a mental hospital.
Just come up here, Mr. Newman.
He had not testified at trial, and I think he wanted to be heard.
Your Honor, I prepared this statement to express my sense of loss for the death of Rusty Snyderman. I'm so sorry for their loss.
He apologized to his own, family, his children.
It is also a tragedy for countless family and friends who saw a person they loved, admired, and respected, who saw him arrested and shamed.
He talked about himself.
It was sort of all about him. Kind of felt like, woe is me, I'm sorry I got caught.
Ultimately, the judge sentenced Hemi Newman to life without parole. Throughout this case, Rusty Snyderman's family, specifically his brother Steve, were at the forefront. He was kind of the family spokesperson, and he didn't mince his words.
It's clear to me that Andrea is covered in Rusty's blood. He will have no peace until everyone involved in Rusty's death is held accountable for their actions.
Andrea Snyderman releases a statement saying she was, quote, grateful for and relieved by the verdict, and describing her husband as an amazing man.
Everybody was wondering, what's next with Andrea? She took the stand in that bombastic way. Everybody thought that she had something to do with this. The question was, would police and prosecutors go after her? And about 5 months later, we got our answer.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jovita Moore.
I'm Justin Farmer, and officers arrested Andrea Snyderman today at her family's home in Putnam County.
As soon as that indictment came down, those marshals pulled Andrea Snyderman out of her parents' lake house and hauled her off to jail.
She is facing charges, including the murder of her husband, Rusty Snyderman.
In layman's terms, if you help, you can be charged like the person that did it.
After Andrea's arrest, the jury foreperson in Hemi Newman's trial speaks out.
She was very angry when she was on the stand, and I thought, there's something. She really is hiding something here.
We don't know how she's involved, but she's involved. And we need to know, how can we have any peace when we don't know the truth?
But what can the prosecution prove?
Lies throughout the investigation and throughout the trial.
Then a bombshell development in Andrea's case before her trial even begins.
Andrea with malice murder. A lot of people were surprised.
I always had empathy for her, but, at the same time, there were all of these unanswered questions. And so, those unanswered questions you want answers to.
You hit her with an array of charges.
Correct. We charged her with murder, obstruction, false statements, perjury.
Are you thinking that you're going to be able to put her behind bars for possibly life as well?
Yeah. I have some very strong circumstantial evidence, right? She's calling the murderer, who she happens to be having an affair with, moments after she finds out that her husband is shot. And then the night before the murder, there was a search on the computer for death benefits. The question is, do we have enough evidence that we can go from she probably had something to do with it to she did have something to do with it?
Where is the evidence that she was a party to the murder of her husband? All you have is that she may have lied about having an affair. That doesn't mean she had anything to do with her husband being murdered.
Indictments are built on solid foundations of evidence, and this one will fall like a pillar of salt.
After 3 weeks in jail, Andrea Snyderman is released on bail and pleads not guilty to all charges.
Anything you want to say just about how much you're looking forward to seeing your children?
The judge put her under house arrest. She couldn't even take her children to school.
On the eve of her murder trial, nearly a year after she was arrested, Andrea Snyderman's in court when the DA drops a bombshell.
I'm standing before the court, standing before millions of people perhaps, asking for the court to dismiss the case right before trial.
Robert James, the DA, had to go in front of the judge and admit that he did not have enough evidence to proceed with the murder case against Andrea Snyderman.
I believe that it would be unjust and unethical to go forward on a charge that I am not 100% sure someone is guilty of.
That can't look good for your office, though.
Oh, it looked terrible.
How hard was that for you, and how often does that happen?
It doesn't happen very often. If you say that the prosecutor is a minister of justice, then you have to own that it's not what you know, quite frankly, it's what you can prove.
Murder charges against Andrea may have been dropped.
Mr. Deputy, bring in the jurors.
But in August of 2013, prosecutors moved forward with her other charges, including lying on the stand and hindering the investigation into her husband's murder.
Across the board, we believe that she lied to police and she lied on the stand.
She hid evidence and she concealed it. She remained silent. She didn't tell them that she was a willing participant with Hemi Newman in this relationship. The fact that she called Hemi and the fact that she texted Hemi, she hid from the police. She suspected him immediately, but she hid her suspicion.
Her husband wound up dead, not because of anything she did. She didn't hide it.
She didn't conceal it. She didn't know about it in advance. She did not try to deny the relationship. She gave them his name, and she has cooperated time and time and time and time again.
Was there a concern that Hemi Newman might testify against her?
I kept thinking up to the day we were going to start trial that we would find out there's this new surprise witness, but that never happened.
I was hoping Hemi would point a finger at Andrea to lessen his sentence. He never considered that option. Hemi continued to express his love for her.
After 2 weeks of testimony and multiple witnesses,
Excuse me, Deputy Garrett, if you can bring in the jury, please.
the jury has a verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Andrea Snyderman, count 1, hindering the apprehension of a criminal, guilty. Count 2, guilty. Count 3, guilty.
Ultimately, Andrea Snyderman is convicted of 9 out of 13 counts against her. Just 18 months after testifying at Hemi Newman's trial, Andrea Snyderman is right back in this courtroom, this time for her own sentencing. She tearfully denies ever having had an affair with her boss, asking the court for leniency.
Please let me go home to my kids. Mr. Newman changed my children's lives forever by killing their father. Please don't make them live without their mother. Thank you.
She blamed it on him, and she was the victim. She's not a victim.
Self-preservation is the only thing on her mind. She lied to her family. She lied to her friends. She lied to us. It was more important for this criminal to protect herself rather than find and convict her husband's killer. We urge you to keep the results of her conduct that led her to lie in the forefront of your deliberations.
The judge gave her 5 years in prison, and she said 10 months.
With credit for time served both in jail and under house arrest, Snyderman is released on parole. And just when everyone thought the final chapter in the saga had been written, a new twist sees a very different-looking Hemi Newman's conviction is thrown out. The Georgia Supreme Court finding that there was a violation of attorney-client privilege related to some of Newman's mental health evaluations.
The prosecution had no right to subpoena experts that we hired that we did not intend to call as witnesses.
A DeKalb County judge set Hemi Newman's retrial.
This retrial is expected to last less than a month. Insanity is at the center of Newman's fate.
In court, the formerly clean-cut GE executive appears markedly different.
Hemi Newman became Orthodox. So when he showed up to court, he was donning the Orthodox beard. He was wearing a yarmulke.
Once again, Newman's defense is arguing that delusions drove him to kill Rusty Snyderman.
You will come to the right verdict, and that is that Hemi Newman is not guilty by reason of insanity.
The jury doesn't buy it, once again finding Newman guilty and sentencing him to life in prison without parole.
Hemi will never get out of prison. He's gonna live his life regretting his actions, regretting that he has no relationship with his own children, regretting that he lost everything.
As for Andrea Snyderman, she's out of prison and no longer has a criminal record, thanks to a Georgia law called the First Offender Act that focuses on nonviolent crimes.
Even though a jury has found her guilty, when a defendant is sentenced under the First Offender Act, as Andrea was, once you have completed the sentence, you have no record. Andrea Snyderman, wherever she is today, under Georgia law, is not a convicted criminal.
So, she essentially is a woman who has a clean record.
Yes. Once you have served out your sentence, probation included, then, your sins, your crimes are erased from the record. And she wasn't given special treatment. She just wasn't treated any worse than anyone else.
It was extremely tragic. There are crazy people out there, and Hemi Newman's one of them. And her path crossed with his, and she will regret it the rest of her life.
Rusty was a wonderful brother. He was a great father. Sophia and Ian adored their father, and they were the light of his life. Every single day of our lives, there will be a hole in our hearts, in our lives where Rusty should be.
The Snyderman family, they really just at the heart of all of it wanted this to be about Rusty and his life and his love for his kids. And I think that was the heartbreaking part of all of this, is that they were just wanting justice for Rusty.
In my dreams, he comes along through the door, just like he always did.
We miss him. He was the light in our life.
He had so much more to offer the world. The world is so much poorer because he's not here.
Every summer, thousands of holidaymakers flock here to the British seaside to enjoy the warm weather, the pebble beaches, and the amusement arcades. But there's another side to these shores, a sinister underbelly of violence and murder, where sins are washed away in the tide, and where the seafront is stalked by sadistic killers who, like the ocean itself, have no respect for human life. My name's Dr. Nell Darby. I've written extensively about the history of crime, researching the reasons why people kill. Over the course of my career, I've developed a keen eye for spotting trends in a killer's behaviour. Nowhere are these trends more striking than in the not-so-sunny seaside towns of Britain's coastline, which have always seemed to attract an extraordinarily high number of murderous rogues. In this series of Murder by the Sea, I examine a selection of chilling new cases, many of which have never been featured on television before. Join me on a journey to the cliff's edge, where the land meets the sea, and where life meets death. They say that the pen is mightier than the sword. So it literally proves in today's Murder by the Sea, as we look at the case of Rebecca Love, killed by a student with a pen for a weapon.
The port of Hull, more formally Kingston upon Hull, lies on the Humber Estuary, the big waterway that flows out into the North Sea. It's been a maritime trading port since probably the 12th or 13th century, when monks in a nearby monastery used it as the way to ship out wool they had produced in their monastery to the continent.
Within Hull in 2007, the city was regenerating itself, really. There was a feel to the city that things were getting better after a lull from the fishing industry collapsing and other things like that that had occurred in the city. People were beginning to think it wasn't such a bad place to live in at that time. It did look as though it was improving.
The University of Hull, and Hull College, which is associated with it, has been in existence since the 1920s and had a royal charter since 1954. It is a campus-style university. Its buildings are dotted around the city, not in the centre, but in the suburbs, if you like.
Universities, from my own experience, are fantastic places in that you go and learn how to be independent, but at the same time you still got some sort of structure in place. If you're a resident in a hall of residence, you're surrounded by other students, you feel that you've got people there to look out for you. And then you get these two worlds colliding between this freedom that university offers and at the same time this lack of kind of parental attention that students get in halls of residence or elsewhere on campus.
The Lawns, until it closed in 2018, was one of the main campus of halls of residence, providing accommodation for students.
The flats were basically 4 bedrooms and a combined kitchen area and shower area and that sort of thing. So it was like 4 people together on one floor. All had their own private room but shared like a communal kitchen and communal washing areas where washing machines were down in the basement.
Until it closed in 2018, it housed around 1,000 students a year. Of those, the only student ever to have been murdered at the Lawns was Rebecca Love.
I'm Tony Garton. I'm an ex-detective chief inspector from the Humberside Police. I always wanted to be a police officer from being about 14 at school. I just wanted to play cops and robbers for real, and the fact of catching people really appealed to me. I was never one for an office job, and in fact, over the 35 years I had in the police force, I only spent about 6 months on an office-based job. I was always outside, it was always practical policing, and it was always dealing with the public, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It stands as one of the best cases I've dealt with, but through no skill of mine. It was a team effort, and I was just happened to be the leader of the team, but the person that detected this crime, without any shadow of a doubt, was the forensic scientist, and they painstakingly stayed at that scene for 2 days, collecting evidence and collecting the right evidence.
Rebecca was 26, slightly older than most students at the university and the college. She was taking a foundation course at Hull College with the intention of going on to a full 3-year degree in marine biology at Hull University.
She was obviously older than the majority of the students, so she was perceived to be a little bit of a loner. She stayed in and she did the studies. I suppose at 19 and she was 26, the age difference is quite a lot, and she had the maturity that maybe I didn't.
On Friday, May the 4th, 2007, security officers knocked on the door of Rebecca Love's room at the Lawns. Rebecca's mother, Carol, had raised the alarm when she hadn't been able to contact her daughter. Rebecca came from a close-knit family and she was in contact with her parents most days.
She last rang her mother on Wednesday the 2nd of May, and all day Thursday there was no contact with Rebecca, which she thought was unusual. She became concerned and tried to ring Rebecca on a mobile phone and couldn't get a reply. And on Friday, when she still hadn't heard from Rebecca, her mother rang the university, and the university had security go around to check her room.
When they got no reply from knocking on her door, the security officers used a master key to enter the room. What they found inside was a murder scene.
It was about 3:30 on the Friday afternoon, and I'd just got to my local golf course at 3:30. I was on call for the weekend, and my phone went, and they told me that they'd found a body of a female in the Lawns residential, students' residence in Cottingham, and I had to attend the scene there. The Lawns is fairly spread out, and we'd sealed off the block where Rebecca lived. Obviously, some students couldn't get into the block, but it's only inconvenienced maybe 16 students. And with it being the Friday night before the bank holiday weekend, some had gone home. So it was surprisingly quiet, which was good for us, but we obviously set up a cordon and wouldn't let anybody into that block. And the word did get out that there'd been an incident and that a student had been found dead, and the police were dealing with it as a suspicious incident.
With the police at the scene, despite extensive inquiries, no one came forward to report hearing the attack.
The first thing we saw was that there'd been no forced entry to the flat, and then we found Rebecca's body. She'd obviously been assaulted many times, and other than that, most things seemed to be in place within the room. Nothing was obviously knocked over or anything like that.
It was immediately clear that she had been subjected to a prolonged and vicious attack. Her body bore 93 separate stab wounds on her neck, on her face, even right in the back of her throat. And the wounds, from the shape of them, appeared to have been inflicted with something like a ballpoint pen.
The injuries had unusual characteristics. They were like a hexagonal penetrating injury, and it was found that that injury was caused by a bit biro. It was the cylinder of the shaft of the pen that had penetrated her body. And so that unusual feature, that unusual characteristic is quite key in this investigation because it tells us about the weapon that's been used.
Rebecca had obviously used a biro at the house, and she must have had a habit of biting the top of the pen, putting it in her mouth and holding it in her teeth. And the black plastic stopper that's in the top had come out and wasn't there. And the top edge of that pen was rather sharp. It later transpired that biro was found on the coffee table in the room, but when it was found, the hexagonal shape of the biro, there was a piece of skin in the top of it.
When that force of penetration had been kind of applied, the pen had actually stuck into the hand of the assailant. So on one end of the pen, they recovered skin fragments that were consistent with those of the assailant. The energy of that attack is such that it's causing not only enough force to penetrate the victim's body, but actually it's had the reverse effect and it's also injuring the assailant.
I don't feel that it's a kind of premeditated act in terms of, right, I'm going to kill her, then I'm going to do this to make the scene appear a certain way. I do feel that there's an element of panic in there and of not thinking straight. It's over killing, it's over violence. There's no need to do all the things that he's doing in order to kill Rebecca. You know, it's complete overkill.
Itself quite clumsy, so it certainly wasn't something that necessarily he'd planned to go to those lengths. Certainly there's something that's been building up in him for some time.
It wasn't a messy scene, but it was obviously one that was odd, because she was on the floor in the living room and nothing seemed to be disturbed. Rebecca was, to be blunt about it, battered and bruised, rather than there was no blood spillage or anything like that anywhere.
As the police and crime scene technicians processed the room in which Rebecca died, they found evidence of numerous people's DNA. That was not exactly unexpected in any hall of residence. You're going to find the DNA of numerous students.
Rebecca had a total of 93 injuries, ranging from bruising to her face and upper body, basically. The official cause of her death, when we did have the post-mortem, was like asphyxiation, but it wasn't strangulation. It was more like she'd been sat on and suffocated in that manner, that she'd been laid on and couldn't breathe because there was no strangulation marks or anything like that.
When they examined her hands, they found that under her fingernails, Rebecca had flakes of skin. That's a telltale sign of someone who has tried to fight off her attacker.
If somebody's got all those injuries, you would expect things to have been upturned and that and the one thing and another. So we actually got a forensic scientist as well as a pathologist down to the scene. Before we moved Rebecca's body, the scientist was able to carry out certain tests and one thing and another, and she was concerned that things didn't look right, and she was concerned that things had happened. The body remained in situ till late the next day, on the Saturday, and the scientist took a lot of samples and a lot of exhibits from the house, which in the end proved invaluable.
There was something odd about what they found on her body itself. It appeared to have been washed down or cleaned crudely with what appeared to be either fabric softener or washing liquid.
So given her injuries in this case, then obviously there would have been blood staining available at the crime scene. And it's not uncommon actually for an assailant to react to that after the act is complete and think, I need to clean this up, I need to cover my tracks. And so in this particular case, he's taken some steps to do a deep clean, but he's been quite sloppy. He's left lots of material that is available for crime scene examiners to recover and record and start to fill in the gaps of what happened before that clean-up. It's exceptionally difficult to clean up a crime scene, especially one in which there has been bloodshed, because the thing, in terms of a forensic approach, we have technology available to us which everyone on the street, they wouldn't recognise the power and ability of our techniques. So we can find blood staining and other trace materials that are not visible to the naked eye. So when people make an effort to clean a crime scene, visibly they might think they've done quite a good job, but forensically there is still the potential to find enough evidence within that crime scene that they've overlooked or missed.
He'd actually tried to clean Rebecca's body up and the scene with a bottle of Febreze fabric conditioner, and he left a a thumbprint in Rebecca's blood on the bottle.
In forensic science, we've had fingerprint technology for centuries, so it is unusual that someone wouldn't be aware of the fact that they might be leaving fingerprints in a crime scene. But of course, once they've had this act, once they've had this attack, it's possible that they're not thinking clearly about how they would get rid of every trace of evidence, and so fingerprint evidence is often found at crime scenes.
He'd not been in any previous bother, so the police didn't have a record of his fingerprints at the time. We knew the parents had rung in and said that they'd not heard from us, so we sent a team to the parents' address to inform them of what had been found and obviously offer comfort to them.
There was one other odd but eventually incriminating piece of evidence in Rebecca Love's room. The police found a handwritten note, and that note appeared to incriminate Rebecca's boyfriend back in her hometown of Wath-on-Dearne.
Rebecca's family were very involved in a spiritualist church. There was a lad at the church who was friendly with Rebecca. They were boyfriend-girlfriend as such, but I think the lad would have wished to be, but Rebecca had told him the same as she told Jason Webster. She didn't want a permanent relationship. She didn't want a strong relationship because she was more bothered about doing the studies. But Rebecca had agreed that he could come over to Cottingham, have a look at where she was and stay the weekend. In the meantime, I was more concerned with Rebecca's mobile phone because it could contain some evidence. I got onto the phone company and they were able to tell us what the last text messages were and the last usage on the phone was. The phone was switched off. I don't know whether it had been damaged or destroyed because we never did find Rebecca's phone.
Whoever killed Rebecca Love was unlikely to be an experienced criminal. The attempt to cover his tracks had been far too amateurish and haphazard. And so they began interviewing Rebecca's friends and co-students at the college and the university.
She'd had contact with Jason Webster by mobile phones in the early hours of Thursday morning.
Jason Webster was 21. He was a second-year history student at the university. He came from what the tabloids would later describe as a good middle-class family.
He didn't attend all his lectures, he wasn't doing all his work, and his tutors were mindful that they may not ask him to continue with his second year of his studies because he was so poor at attending the lectures and doing the work.
In terms of his psychopathology, he's certainly got slight hints of narcissism about him. He certainly seems to be somebody who wants to be in control. He seems himself someone who's of a high social standing even. Certainly in terms of somebody who's made advances towards somebody and had those rejected, he wouldn't have taken that nicely. And he would have picked people out who were less likely perhaps to reject him, and he would sort of go into that sort of spiral really of picking them out and not wanting to get in that situation of rejection again.
He seemed to want to be the centre of attention, always telling his mates how good he was at things and that. I mean, say, for an example, on the Wednesday night when he'd arranged to see Rebecca, there was a Champions League football match on between AC Milan and Manchester United, and he said he would watch that in the Gardener's Arms public house on Cottingham Road, opposite the university, with two of his student friends, and then he would come straight after the match to the lawns and see Rebecca. We got onto his mobile company, got the messages from him to confirm it was him that was using the phone at the time. Then we went onto the university, found out where Jason lived, went to the flat where he was living, and there was nobody there, and they said he was out in the town going around the clubs on that Friday night. Only 2 days since he'd murdered Rebecca.
Interviews with Rebecca's friends revealed that she had met Jason Webster a few months earlier in a nightclub in Hull, and the two had become friendly. They'd had a casual relationship, but according to Rebecca's friends, she had told Webster that she didn't want a relationship. For her, her academic studies were too important to be distracted by having a relationship. As the police later explained, she was adamant her studies came first.
Rebecca was a mature student. Focused on her studies, she rarely socialised with many of the other students in the halls. You tend to find men like Webster will target people they identify as being different, as being vulnerable, who appear to have fewer ties to other people, friendships, things like that, because they want to isolate these women, to make them dependent on them. They think that they're going to be more successful with these women because they are flattered by the attention. It's that kind of feeling that, you haven't got anybody, you must want me. And that they will seek to isolate you further, to make you dependent on them. And certainly in Rebecca's case, there's been much written about how she was almost socially isolated. She was more focused on her studies. So she was more on her own than other students who were younger and had more in common with each other. And he kind of identified that as being a weakness, a vulnerability in her, and so kind of focused his attention on her.
So when we see people who perhaps are a little bit more vulnerable or maybe just a bit shy or socially anxious, they often gravitate towards people who will bring that out of them a little bit. And he could clearly recognise this was probably a pattern of behaviour, that he realised that he'd pick off this kind of type of person. This was probably something that he learned very quickly and was able to do, and it afforded him some ability to be more dominant in the relationship, to be able to interact with people that were perhaps beyond his normal sort of social group.
Obviously, she was slightly older than the average student. She was in her 20s, she was 26. But at the same time, that's still quite young to be kind of dealing with all these emotions, with all the pressures of university life, even not taking into account kind of attention from an individual where you don't quite know how to tell him that you don't want a relationship with him anymore, or you're not ready for a serious relationship. What happens when you change your mind about wanting to be with an individual? Have you got that support in place, that courage in place to say no without worrying that I haven't got a close network with rejection? You owe him sex, you owe him time. And in Jason Webster's case, it's sudden that after having drinks, he felt he deserved success with winter violence. Jason Webster had been seen at Rebecca's halls of residence on the night of the murder, so the police went to bring him in for interview.
I didn't interview Jason Webster, the interview team did. We had a process where we could watch the interview as it was going on. And to be honest, Jason Webster just completely denied any knowledge of Rebecca's murder. He did admit that he had gone to her flat in the early hours of the 3rd of May, that would be the Thursday morning, and he said that he'd visited her, that had sex, and then he left. He vehemently denied it for the best part of 6 months, and he also denied it to his parents, which was upsetting for them in some respects, because his father was allowed to interview him after he'd been charged and before he went to prison on remand. His father told us afterwards, he says, well, I believe him. I absolutely believe him, because I've told him, if he has done it, for goodness sake, tell the police, we'll stand by you and we'll get it sorted out, but it'll be better for you. And his dad said, Dad, I haven't.
With Webster, I do wonder about the impact of his family on him refusing to admit guilt. I know that his father had asked him to confess and said, look, if you did it, I will stick by you. And he still couldn't confess. I think it's that feeling that if I tell my family what I've done, then I'm kind of really showing that I've let them down. I've ruined their expectations of me. This is a man from a good family, a history student at a good university, and suddenly he's done this absolutely appalling crime, and he can't even admit it to himself. If he admits it to his family, if he admits it to anybody, then he can't hide what he's done anymore. He can't pretend that he's still this good man with good prospects. He's admitting that he's ruined everything, not only for him, but for Rebecca's family, for his own family.
Although he's committed this crime and is left quite literally with blood on his hands, he still then tries to manipulate the situation. So it shows a certain callousness towards him, certainly elements of psychopathy in terms of he has no real empathy for his victim. All he really is bothered about at this stage is kind of trying to manipulate the situation to save his own skin.
He was always adamant in the interview. He just said, no, I didn't touch her. we put the injuries on the back of his hand to him, and he just said, I did that when I fell over a small wall going to the university. Both his parents fully believed it, and to be honest, they paid for the barrister and his defence, really. And at one point, they nearly applied for bail.
The detectives established that Webster had indeed been out on a heavy drinking session night in Hull's pubs and clubs on the night in question. They found that he had boasted to his friends that he was going on from there and was determined to pick up a woman.
That night he had a shirt on with a breast pocket. He had a condom in the breast pocket, and he kept telling his mates, after the football, I'm going and I'm going to have sex and all this. So he was telling his mates exactly what he was doing. He had no respect for Rebecca in any way, shape or form, I don't think. It was just, I'm one of the lads. And then after the football match, his mates were going to the Students' Union on Cottingham Road, and there were some female friends of his friends came as well, and he decided that he would stay with them because there was more girls than men, and he thought his chances were most probably better with them. When Jason did leave the Students' Union, he actually shared a cab to go to the lawns with two other students that were in residence there, and they came forward very quickly and said, well, we shared a taxi with the bloke that got there about 1 o'clock, and he was talking about, and he was saying he was a history student. So I think, although the mobile phone evidence found him the quickest, once we'd found those two students, we would have found Jason anyhow, I think.
Evidence from Rebecca's phone showed that she had texted Webster earlier in the evening saying, don't come round tonight. Jason Webster wasn't the sort of young man to take no for an answer. He went to Rebecca's room that night, determined to have sex with her, whether she wanted to or not.
I'm sure it happened very quickly, and to be quite honest, I would imagine that Rebecca had said something that really upset Jason. She didn't want to let him into the flat in the first place because that was obvious from the text. She obviously did let him in the end because there was no forced entry into the flat. I think she maybe told him then that she couldn't have him coming round at this time in the morning, 2 o'clock, being drunk and one thing and another. I would think she's told him that there's a lad coming at the weekend, that he's coming to stay, and she didn't really want to see him anymore. And then I think he must have really lost it.
Webster was blaming Rebecca for being interested in another man, which he had every right to be. He did not own her. It was not, a serious relationship by any stretch of the imagination. But it's this kind of, if I can't have you, nobody can. But also, I'm going to then blacken your name and make out that you have some sort of responsibility for your own death. It's part of this needing to be in control. He wanted to control the narrative and actually rewrite the story, portraying Rebecca in a way that does not reflect what she was really like.
Jason Webster had obviously found out about this lad coming at the weekend, and he'd left a note in Rebecca's flat implying that this lad had been across on the Wednesday night, which, when you think about it, didn't really make sense because Jason didn't get to the flat until about 1 o'clock Thursday morning. But he'd certainly written a note on a paper. It was confusing, really, but he'd left a note sort of implying that this new man had been across at the flat that Wednesday.
The production of that letter demonstrates that there's this kind of chaotic reaction to the circumstances, and also it's part of how do I cover the tracks. So the writing of that letter seems to me to be indicating that this person is just trying to kind of chaotically find a way to cover what they've done.
I don't think he ever thought it was a spontaneous thing, but once it happened, he certainly thought about what he did after he'd killed Rebecca, and that showed quite a level of knowledge as to destroy the mobile phone, clean the scene, clean the body, and in fairness, if he hadn't been so drunk, he maybe wouldn't have left as much evidence as he did do at the scene. We never did find the shirt. He must have destroyed his shirt at some point. He bought a new pair of jeans on the Thursday and took Rebecca's mobile phone with him and the key to the flat because he locked the flat. neither of which we ever found. The evidence that led us to charging Jason Webster was the fingerprint on the Febreze bottle, because once he was in custody, we took his fingerprints, and it was quickly discovered that that fingerprint in blood on the bottle, A, it was Rebecca's blood, and B, it was Jason Webster's thumbprint. So that was the evidence that allowed us to charge him the following Monday, the 8th of May, and he remained in custody ever since then. But obviously, just because you've charged somebody, your evidence gathering goes way on beyond that, and we were still gathering evidence. When he went to the Students' Union, there was some photography students that were obviously trying to make a little bit of pocket for themselves. You could have your picture taken for £1. Went through all the digital images that they took, and we found this one of Webster, his two friends, and these girls. And in the photograph, we noticed he was wearing the watch, which, to be fair, at that point we hadn't recovered. He'd actually gone into his property and was at the prison when we recovered it. We recovered it from the prison, and it was found to still have specimens of Rebecca's blood on the strap.
When anybody sustains a bleeding injury, then obviously there's an expectation or a hope that blood would transfer to the perpetrator. And that's kind of the one of the threads throughout the investigation. And of course, if someone then has tried to clean themselves, then they might discard clothing, they might wash, they might have a shower to try and remove any trace of material. But oftentimes in cases of violent assault, we find that blood and body material can be trapped in jewellery, and that can be quite unusual finding because people don't pay attention to that kind of item. And in this particular case, his watch was recovered, and under magnification we were looking for traces of blood, and they discovered minute traces of blood within the links of the watch. So the finding of blood in this case that matched Rebecca Love was a key finding in this investigation, because it demonstrates that his watch has been exposed to her blood, and that obviously then places a timestamp on it which puts him and his jewellery in a scene where her blood is available. And so that is almost certainly one of the key links in this case.
And another piece of evidence that later come out, Jason had some scratches on the back of his hand, and he said that he'd fallen over because he'd had too much to drink watching the football, and he fell over a small wall when they were going to the Students' Union. However, when we got this photograph of them, you could clearly see on the photograph that Jason's back of his hand was uninjured. So it obviously...
What makes me particularly sad about this case is the fact that Rebecca's body went undiscovered for 24 hours, and it could have been longer if her mother hadn't actually realised there was something wrong. I think universities since have become better at recognising...
So we managed to keep the lid on it with the help of the university, the help of the students, and it didn't get to sort of people fretting about was there a murderer on the loose in the lawns, because it just wasn't the case. It didn't really have the effect that it could have had if we hadn't been so quick in charge. The fingerprint on the bottle and the blood in the watch, it was pretty much, well, basically game, set and match. He went for a pre-trial hearing, which was 7 days before the commencement of his trial, and his defence barrister obviously told him, if you plead not guilty to this, I don't think I can represent you really, because the evidence is so overwhelming.
A pathologist gave evidence, and his testimony was damning. He said the attack which had killed Rebecca Love had been so prolonged, so frenzied, and so vicious that it amounted to a form of torture.
Rebecca's parents, they couldn't listen to the evidence of the attack, and they couldn't listen to the pathologist's report. They left the court crying. They came back in later, but it was a shock really. But the whole day was a shock really, because we expected him to put in a plea of not guilty, and obviously on seeing the evidence, he changed his plea. Rebecca's parents, it wasn't a relief because the whole incident had ruined their lives, a brother's life, and also Jason Webster's life and his parents' lives, and they were very sort of philosophical about it, really, and said, you know, it's just been a complete waste. So there wasn't a relief, because they just said our lives will never be the same.
What would have been an extended and very painful trial for Rebecca's family became foreshortened. It became a hearing about how long Jason Webster should serve for this vicious, brutal murder.
Sometimes people are bragging about what they've done, but I think sometimes it's a human instinct to want to talk to somebody about what you've done, especially when it's something so enormous. And really, you know that you should be keeping quiet about it. It's the last thing you should be mentioning. And that kind of makes you want or need to talk about it more. You want to kind of almost act like it's a confession. You need to explain to somebody what you've done. But also with him, you have to remember that this is a man who's kind of, he wants to be seen as more successful than he is. He wants to be seen as this powerful man who's irresistible to women. And this kind of murder of a vulnerable woman puts him in that position of power. So at the same time, there's this kind of element of, well, I didn't mean to do it, but actually now I kind of want to show off about it because I've shown that I am in control. I am more powerful than a woman because look what I did.
Typically, for this arrogant, privileged young man, he tried in court to play down all of this evidence. He came up with a cock and bull story about what had happened and how he had come to jab the biro into Rebecca's face and neck. He said he had actually done so to try and save her life, and he said the same thing about wiping her body down with the fabric softener or washing liquid. That was a way not of covering up the evidence, that I was trying to revive her, he told the judge. Well, the judge didn't believe a word of it. He said Webster had told, his words, a pack of lies, and he sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years.
The fact that he's never shown any remorse for the crime hints at a more complex personality where perhaps this desire to control women, to be seen as sexually powerful, sexually successful, was kind of exposed by the drink, but it was always something that was present.
Within the kind of prison system, lots of people undergo sort of therapies and programs, and one of the big things that they have to confront is the guilt of their crimes and show some remorse for what they've done, and it's a process of developing that understanding, but he's really not been able to do that at this stage, and it does really imply that there's still some level of potential dangerousness there in terms of he's either unwilling to or unable to accept what he's done. So it would really imply that it does pose some danger still to society.
The forensic evidence in this case was absolutely key because it demonstrated a forensic link between him and her injuries and her blood. And so that places us in a position where we can effectively demonstrate that he had a part to play in her murder.
Rebecca Love had a bright academic future ahead of her, but Jason Webster's refusal to accept her rejection of him had tragic consequences and ensured she would never get the future she
thấy em chiều nay đi về. Hỏi ra 12 chim sao đã sang sông sao đi lấy chồng. Còn đâu nhưng chưa theo bước, giờ chỉ có anh lẻ loi đi về. Ai đem chim sáo qua sông để cho chim sáo sổ lòng xa xăm đi về. Sao ơi bay trường ơi đấy, chờ ai ai chờ, thôi rồi hết đời hết trông. Trách cho số kiếp bận bèo, duyên kia chẳng đặng, thì đành như sao sang sông. Thời gian trôi đi nhanh quá, tiếng yêu tôi chưa kịp xếp phần. Một ngày kia che cuối xóm, chẳng thấy em chiều nay đi về. Hỏi ra 12 chim sao đã sang sông sao đi lấy chồng. Còn đâu nhưng chiều theo bước, giờ chỉ có anh lẻ loi đi về. Ai đem chim sáo sang sông để cho chim sáo sổ lòng bay xa. Sao bay bỏ lại mình ta bơ vơ một nẻo xa xăm đi về. Sao ơi bầy trừ ngồi đây chờ ai ai chờ, ai chờ hết đời rồi chăng. Trách cho duyên số bọn bèo, duyên kia chẳng đặng, thì đành như sao quang sông. Trách cho số kiếm bọn bèo, duyên kia chẳng đặng, thì đành như sao sáng sông.
For a long time, I was very angry. I'm not a cop. I'm not a coroner. I'm not the DA. But I had to actually step into their role and do their job. Didn't even want to look into it. It's almost as though she wasn't even a person. I had no idea what I was getting into. And I really went into this absolutely naive. It's been a never-ending saw blade of witnesses, documents, and searching for answers and the truth behind my mother's murder. I did what needed to be done. If I wouldn't have done it, nobody would have done it. Bus has a name. Her name is Sissy Hankshaw. From the book. Even cowgirls get the blues. I love the peace signs that we get driving down the road. There are certain things that make me happy, keep me light, remind me to get out of my head, because you have to live life. My name is Lisa Coppell, and I live in Arvada, Colorado. My mother was born Carmina Coppell in Oakland, California, August 14th of 1930, to a well-to-do family in Berkeley. My mom was always searching for love and never quite found the right love. My mom had several different marriages, resulting in a total of 7 of us children. But eventually it was just my mom, my sister, Paula, and myself. In 1970, Mom moved an 8-foot wide by 24-foot long mobile home up to Stratton Park, Colorado. Where we lived was very rural, very rustic. We had no indoor plumbing and virtually off-grid. In 1972, Mom noticed a pickup truck across the field and spotted a man named Chuck, Charles Leroy Anderson. Mom and Chuck had a whirlwind romance. And on February 12th of 1973, they went and got married. They were only married 9 days, but Chuck was a bad influence on Mom. They drank a lot during the week, weekends. It didn't matter. February 21st of 1973. Mom and Chuck had been at the bar drinking, and they came home pretty drunk. I laid in my bunk and listened to them fight, and I remember him yelling at her, "Look at what you made me do," and screaming at her, calling her dirty and nasty names. And then I went to sleep because it got quiet. Well, a little while later, I'm awakened by one of the neighbors shaking me gently, saying, "Girls, you have to get up. Something's happened and you need to get dressed and we need to go." I was guided down the hallway where I had to step over a sheet that was my mom's legs. I knew what death was, but I didn't quite register the darkness that I'd just experienced. We were put into an emergency vehicle, an ambulance. I was 10 years old, so I couldn't really process what was going on. I'm up in between the driver and Chuck asking, "What happened to my mom? What happened to my mom? Will somebody tell me what happened to my mom?" And they wouldn't answer me. I overheard them call in that there was a 42-year-old woman, Caucasian, with a gunshot wound to her head. Chuck had suffered a bullet wound to his hand. Chuck's explanation of what happened was they were showing the gun to each other, and my mother, she got startled and flipped it in the air and caught it with her thumb, and it just went off in her forehead. When we got to the hospital, we're unloaded, and Chuck is taken into an emergency area, and my sister Paula and I were set on a gurney and told to be big girls about this. They said, "Your mom has died," and asked if we had any living relatives around that we could contact. Chuck and I didn't speak until the funeral. And he insisted that he didn't kill my mom. It was just an accident. But I couldn't stop thinking about all of the nasty things that I heard him say. It left a lot of doubt and questions. I remember not being happy with certain answers that I was given. Even though the 10-year-old Lisa saw and knew what she knew, the police didn't really talk to me. My mom's death was ruled an accident, and it was case closed. My mom's belongings were put in probate, along with the livestock from our land. Apparently, Chuck was the one who bought my horses. We became orphans and wards of the court. My sister and I both were in the foster care system, going through foster homes. It was a very hard transition, and that's how we started the next part of our lives.
Remember, people used to say, "Why do you hang out with her? She gets so crazy and angry." And I said, "Well, she has reason to be angry. Imagine if your life was the way that hers was.
Foster homes and group homes and being flipped around to here to there and
sleeping in your car, sleeping in the park." I remember when you started looking for your family.
1994. I was trying to find family. I wanted to know where I came from, and I made contact with the father listed on my birth certificate, and he wrote me a 15-page letter telling me the details of his relationship with my mom. At the end of his 15-page letter, he had written something to the effect of, "Am I sure that my mom died the way I think she did?" And I started questioning, do I really know? I remembered being asleep in the bed with the covers over my head and listening to them argue and them fight. I don't recall all of the details of what happened that night, but I do remember Chuck screaming at Mom, telling her, "See what you made me do. Look what you made me do." Calling her a bitch. I wanted to find out what the police report had to say about how my mom died. I'm not a trained detective. I'm not a PI by trade, but I'm kind of like a pit bull. Once I get on it and I latch onto it, I'll hang on until the bitter end. And I find all of what I'm after. The end of his 15-page letter sparked something in me. I needed to find out the truth to what happened to my mom. I started by getting the police report. It was a 3-inch thick file with tape on it. Red tape. Case closed tape. And they cut the tape right there in front of me and took the police report out, and they made me my copies. I had to take several days to read it through the first time to start making notes. So this is the first version that Chuck gave regarding how my mom died. How does this make sense to an officer? Somebody that knows firearms doesn't make sense. In the police report, there were 3 versions of what Chuck told the police. In the first one, she was drunk, so he had to take the gun away from her, and he had grabbed the barrel of the gun, and the gun went off accidentally. In the second version, she got startled and dropped the gun, and it just went off from the floor to her forehead. And then the third explanation was that he had to go to the bathroom and went outside, and when he came back in, she was posed with the gun in her hand, and Chuck alluded to my mother committing suicide. I was at my wit's end and felt I had no direction to go. It disgusted me to know that Chuck was living his best life in the bars with no accountability. I tried to block it out, but Fort Collins was a small town. There were a couple of times where our paths would cross, and I chose to look the other way. I chose a different avenue. I thought maybe I should go ahead and do some actual investigation. And so I began contacting people. I broke down a list of witnesses, sheriffs, DAs, and I set forth to contact almost everybody on those lists. I started with the coroners. One of the people I contacted was Dr. Agura, and he was very engaging and said he remembered my mom's case. He said that he remembered having to do a second autopsy on my mom. There was disagreement on the angle of the gun and whether or not it was her hand on the gun at the time it was fired. And he said the second autopsy was a considerable difference in opinion from the first autopsy. The angle of the first autopsy was not even plausible with Charlie's versions of the story. He was adamant that the first one had been botched. But a panel of 6 professionals decided that the differences in angles wasn't something that needed additional investigation. They were going to rule Mom's death as an accident, case closed, and they thought everything was done until I came around asking questions. I wanted to know what was in that second autopsy. So I called the coroner's office and I asked for them to take a look at this file again. They couldn't even find the file. There was nothing. It was referenced to a miscellaneous file, but the file was empty and had been for years. And it felt like they just covered it up. There was no headway there. After the coroner's office, I stopped at Old Chicago and thought, you know, I can have a drink, and it's a bartender's job to listen to my woes. I was just pissed. You know, I left the coroner's office, and they don't show any records, you know. Oh, well, we don't even show we did this case.
My name is Diane Fairman. In 1995, I was bartending, and Lisa came into the bar and sat down kind of at the end of the bar and just seemed a little distraught and upset.
I began to tell her a brief rundown of my mom's homicide. I needed to find the truth and the answers.
Sometimes people come into bars and they have tall tales. There was just something about you. I just listened and got more and more intrigued, and then when you said it was all in Larimer County, I'm like, oh.
Well, guess what?
I said, well, strangely enough, I just happen to know the person you need to talk to because I'm interning at the coroner's office in Larimer County.
Here I am, looking to get some questions answered, and here she's an intern at the coroner's office. I couldn't believe it. Look at it how you will. I have no doubt that Mom sent me to Old Chicago that day.
I went back and I just said, her story sounds very plausible, and I don't see, even as an intern, that this case doesn't deserve a second look. It just doesn't sound like it could have happened, you know, the way they're saying it happened. I realized who she needed to talk to. It would be the chief deputy coroner of Larimer County. When I went back to the office, I told him that I had met this woman, and she seemed very compelling and very honest and had some interesting facts to tell him, and that he needed to listen to her. And he did.
The Larimer County coroner called me back and said that they found the documents, which included the second autopsy. I was hoping maybe the second autopsy would have the truth and the answers. Lo and behold, it changed everything. Once they found the second autopsy, I made contact with Fred Rosenberg. Fred Rosenberg was an investigator for the Larimer County Coroner's Office. He compared both autopsies and did a skull diagram showing the bullet path. Fred said that the first autopsy wasn't as accurate as Dr. Agura's. It left a lot of doubt and questions. Fred wanted to go over this with me and asked if I could come in. So I went to Fred Rosenberg's office, where he gave me copies of all notes, all reports. It was very difficult initially to view the death pictures. I was saddened that that's now how I'm going to remember her. But I needed to step out of the 10-year-old Lisa and step into the investigator Lisa. It's all the same person, but it's two completely different roles. That's the only way I've gotten through this.
Fred took paperwork and all of his sketches and his analysis, and he took it to Dr. Allen, who was the chief medical examiner at the time. Dr. Allen looked at it and agreed wholeheartedly with Fred that this could not have happened the way the first autopsy says it happened, that it definitely was an investigation that needed new ballistics.
The chief coroner reviewed all of the documents that Fred had showed me. However, they did not have the gun because the sheriff's office purged evidence from their evidence room in 1978. Back then, the case wasn't a homicide. So they sold the gun in a big gun auction. So I set out to find a similar gun. I wanted to know the length of the barrel, the length of the handle with the cylinder, and how big the gun was. I had gone to the local pawn shops and traced an H&R single action 22 revolver, and this is what I got. I had to disprove all of Chuck Anderson's stories. In the beginning, Chuck was saying that the gun went off accidentally. Well, the angle of entry in that second autopsy was above her ear and kind of to the back of her head, which couldn't have happened unless the gun was behind her. So I looked in the mirror and I held the paper gun up, and I'm like, there's no way her hand could have been on the gun with a 6-inch barrel. Her wrist would have been broken. The angle disproved almost all of his versions. The gun falling to the floor, or him taking the gun away from her by the barrel. And it wasn't suicide. Her hand could not have been on the gun at the time it was fired. Period. I went in and role-played to prove that Mom's hand could not have been on the gun. At that angle, it couldn't be. I showed Dr. Allen, and he agreed with me. Her hand could not have been on the gun without her hand being contorted.
Fred and Dr. Allen and Lisa had, I think, several meetings, and Dr. Allen ultimately had enough evidence in front of him that he was able to say, this isn't an accident.
Within a couple of days, Patrick Allen had signed the death certificate to read suspicious for homicide, which is huge, huge, huge. Nobody gets the death certificate changed. It's terribly hard to get a death certificate changed. Finally, there's acknowledgement that I'm not the only one who believes that he killed her. And it's in writing. It's official. What a feat. What a feat. Now, is the sheriff's office going to work on opening the investigation? When the coroner signed the death certificate, I'm thinking, all right, they'll reopen the investigation, it'll go to trial, and then I'll have justice, and there'll be justice for my mother. Absolutely, I thought that they would see what the coroner saw, but they didn't. When I spoke to the sheriff's investigator, he told me that he had interviewed Chuck Anderson recently and that he believed Chuck's explanation in the original police report. And he told me the case was going to be open but inactive until there's new evidence. He wasn't going to work the file anymore. Another brick wall. I couldn't come in and do it for them, but I could get some more answers on my end. I continued to talk to people. I was up near Horsetooth, and I stopped to buy a lighter. And I go in, and who's standing next to me but Chuck? Counting pennies for a pack of cigarettes.
You hadn't seen him in all those years?
Hadn't seen him. Didn't want to. But there he was, ruining my day. He didn't see me. So I got my lighter, and I got in my little minivan, and I sat in the parking lot, and I shook. Oh my God, did I shake. Did I run him over? What do I do? Do I follow him? What do? I watched him go into a bar. And so I walked in. I walked right up to him, and then he announces to the bar that I'm his long-lost daughter for haven't seen me for years and this and this. And I said, there's an empty table back there. You and I. Back there now. And he came and sat down with me. I listened to his story of where he put my mom's ashes. And I knew it was a lie because Chuck bragged at the bars that he took my mom's ashes and threw them into a garbage pit next to his pig pen. Eventually, I told Chuck I wanted something of my mother's. Anything. So we went back to his house.
Must have been chilling, right?
It was chilling. But I know he's not going to kill me. I'm too friggin' mean. We sat down and he opened his little file drawer and pulled out the deed to Mom's land. He held on to it like a frickin' trophy. Of course, it had been sold in probate. You know, no value other than that was a piece of paper that was in her purse. and I got it back. And he didn't get to keep the trophy. After seeing the deed to the land, I started questioning if Chuck's motive was a monetary value. I don't know, maybe he wanted to try and get her livestock, her land, and it was all about the money. They weren't together for love, that's for sure. Several people had made mention that Chuck wanted to take a life insurance policy out on her, which started a big fight in the bar, because he wanted to be the beneficiary, and Mom wanted Paula and I to be the beneficiary. They were only married 9 days. So she really got uncomfortable and really regretted marrying him and really wanted out and wanted him to go away, but he would not go. I had Chuck Anderson's motive, but it felt like it didn't matter. We can never hit the DA if the police don't do their portion. That's it. It's as far as we go. I'm questioning, will we ever see whatever justice is? Chuck Anderson took everything from me and took everything from my sister Paula. All the things that Paula endured in her years of placement and my mom's death, it even went as far as Paula committing suicide. She was a very troubled person and saw no other way out. I will always think Chuck's responsible for that. In 2001, I was working for a gun scope company, and somebody made mention that they had seen an article written about my mom's death. And in it, they too alluded to suicide. And that was one of my biggest peeves. So I called the Longmont Daily Times and I asked for them to do a retraction. And I waited 7 months before I just had it. And I went into the Longmont Daily Times and I ran into Dee Dee Corral.
There are certain details that I do remember very well.
Right.
Like you storming into the paper, wanting to...
For me, it was, I'm dialing direct.
It's not common for a newspaper to get people coming in who are unhappy with something, and sometimes there is not much to their claims. And in this case, Lisa was fired up, but she also had all the documentation to support her grievance that the word suicide had been used.
I don't mind doing an article on my mom, just make it factual. Mm-hmm. Because if I die, somebody's going to look at this and say, it was suicide.
I would feel the same way. I went through all the reports and corrected some mistakes in the coverage. And actually, looking back at my notes, I noticed there were a number of contradictions in Charles Anderson's statements against what I knew was in the police reports. The story would not be complete without his version. We had to make the effort to try to talk to him.
I remember you were going to go up there, and I said, don't go out there alone.
I didn't have anyone available at the paper that day to go with me, so I got my dad to go with me. When I arrived, we had some concerns about Mr. Anderson. He had stickers on the outside of his door, making sure that everyone knew that he had weapons inside, but we had to make the effort. Mr. Anderson was drinking a beer and watching a show on TV. I think it was The Golden Girls. He invited me in. He was friendly, and he seemed willing to talk. And so I started off by asking him just some questions about the case. Immediately, he began to say things that contradicted what was in the police reports. And finally, at some point, just said, what happened? How did she die? How did she get shot? And that was where he looked up. He looked at me, and he said, well, she didn't shoot herself.
I remember you calling me back. Lisa, you'll never believe it. He said that her hand wasn't on the gun at the time it was fired, and that she didn't shoot herself.
It was very chilling to me. It was just very direct. What he was saying to me was that he had shot her. It was, to me, a stunning admission. As soon as I left, I called up the sheriff's office and I said, listen, here's what he said to me, and what's your comment? And the lieutenant said, well, I'm not going to tell you my comment based on what you just said. I'm reopening the case.
It's not appropriate
for me to judge maybe what wasn't done in the past. I wasn't around in 1973 as far as police work. But in the 2000s, when it came up again with Dee Dee Corral from the Longmont Times call, I was surprised and maybe a little skeptical at first, this is the media calling to tell me something. I was intrigued by what Dee Dee had to say because he was making a statement he'd never made before, and that changed everything. Here's the evidence to explain inconsistencies with the story that Nina had pulled the trigger herself. It seemed at the time that he was a bit brazen, and he'd gotten away with it all these years.
He bragged in the bars all these years, but nobody ever reported it.
Right. We had information that might finally make a difference. So we were able to put an investigation together, and I assigned the case to investigator Robert Coleman. And he began to look at the case again with fresh eyes.
My hopes were very high that Bob Coleman was going to be able to do this. So I met with him, and I got his file back up to speed. And I was really, for the first time in years, feeling that I would get justice.
Robert Coleman was pretty renowned as a very good interviewer. He was the best interviewer we had. So the key in this case was for Investigator Coleman to bring Chuck Anderson into the office, into an interview room that we could control, to prove that his story, his narrative wasn't right.
Charlie?
Yeah.
Bob Coleman, how you doing?
Thanks, Bob.
Nice to meet you. This is Ernie Hudson.
That's pretty good. God bless the VA.
Because this case had so many different versions, it was important to start broad and narrow down to those facts that were disputed, and ultimately the fact of who had their finger on the trigger.
As soon as I got the door open and walked in, I seen her, and I saw her pull the trigger. No kidding.
In the course of the interview, there is a point where Under Sheriff Hudson explained it couldn't have occurred in the ways that you had described in the past, and here's the evidence, and here's the evidence.
The gun didn't go off by itself. No. You had possession of the gun before she was shot, Charlie. You had possession of the gun.
The detectives told me that Bob Coleman had spent 5 hours interviewing Chuck Anderson. They had put up a whiteboard outside the room, and every time they got him to disprove a version of one of his stories,
I'll get you some more coffee, Charlie.
They would go outside and check it off the whiteboard.
There is only one truth, clearly, and that made the ultimate difference in this case. There was only one truth, and he had to come to it, leading him to a point where he quietly says, "You're right."
What happened that night?
I pulled the trigger, but it was like I was helping her commit suicide. That's what it felt like to me.
Why did you think you were helping her commit suicide?
She talked about it.
But you shot.
Yeah, I did.
He finally admitted that he shot Nina.
I think we've come so far today. Charlie, what do you think?
I feel like somebody took a big something off my shoulders.
Chuck Anderson had spent years lying about what he had done. But I felt, for the first time, vindicated. It was actually the 30th anniversary of my mom's murder. The DA's office said that they had enough to go forward with an arrest warrant. And I never thought I'd see that. I remember the detectives called me to let me know that right now, as we were speaking, they're placing the handcuffs on Charles Anderson for the murder of my mother. I could hear the sound of the cuffs clicking, and I cannot tell you how elated that made me. He didn't get away with it, and that was the most beautiful thing. After all those years, it was actually going to make it to court. We went into court, and Chuck actually had 3 lawyers that went into court with him. I knew that he would fight to get it dismissed, and I just want him to spend some time in jail.
It was almost like this was the last shot at a successful conclusion. But I knew we had evidence that he couldn't run away from. Justice needed to be served regardless of the time that had gone by.
I'm feeling that this is really going to go somewhere, and the next whole bottom drops out. I got a call from the district attorney's office saying that they were going to offer him a plea bargain. They charged him with second-degree murder, and they were going to allow him to plea bargain to manslaughter. The laws applicable in 73 were not the same as in 2003, so they had to use the laws that were applicable in 1973, which gave a lot more good time credit. They were less restrictive into sentencing. They were telling me that they were going to offer him a 1-year sentence.
Because the case was now decades old to the district attorney's office. They didn't have what you need to get a good, strong, long sentence. Then they just end up settling for what you can get.
There was a possibility that it would be thrown out of court and we would have never been able to take it back. So I had to be thankful for what I got. It sickened me, but it's what we had. I think in the end, I wanted him to say he was guilty. I wanted him, for the first time in his life, to own that he killed my mom in an open courtroom, to the judge and me in the courtroom. August 14th was my mom's birthday. The next day, we went into the courtroom for his sentencing, where Chuck was supposed to say, guilty, in order to get the 1-year sentence. But he stood there and he said, nolo contendere. I couldn't believe it. Nolo contendere means no contest. And everybody in the courtroom gasped. The judge said, I'm going to take that plea as a guilty plea based on the agreement that you reached with the district attorney's office. But it was just insulting. With time served while we were waiting to go to court, by the time they actually got him down to 4 Mile Correctional Facility, he only spent 5 weeks imprisoned. After Chuck got out of prison, the people in his hometown didn't want him around. He had difficulties finding people that accepted him. And a few years ago, he died. And it was a relief to know that Chuck's no longer on the streets and he can no longer hurt anybody.
Quite frankly, you presenting your evidence to them the way you did was a key component. You were the driver all that time. You're a hell of an investigator.
Thank you.
You're a hell of an investigator.
You were my ally.
I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you.
I dislike the word closure because there's so many open wounds. There's answers. There's time that passes that helps make things a little easier. But there's no closure. There's still the gaping hole of missing the person that you loved. It never changes. It doesn't go away. I'm glad that I got done what I got done. It's huge, really. It's monumental. I had the truth on my side. I had my mom on my side. I felt she was there, and I got to say what she couldn't say. It was the gift that I could give her. And I believe that she watched it all. And I know she's proud of me, which makes the 10-year-old Lisa happy to know Mom's proud. When the coroner signed the death certificate, I'm thinking, all right, they'll reopen the investigation, it'll go to trial, and then I'll have justice, and there'll be justice for my mother. Absolutely, I thought that they would see what the coroner saw, but they didn't. When I spoke to the sheriff's investigator, he told me that he had interviewed Chuck Anderson recently, and that he believed Chuck's explanation in the original police report. And he told me the case was going to be open but inactive until there's new evidence. He wasn't going to work the file anymore. Another brick wall. I couldn't come in and do it for them, but I could get some more answers on my end. I continued to talk to people. I was up near Horse.
Tango to extinguish cigarette smoke. Suddenly I miss you and my heart aches. He searched for folk songs. Warsaw, Warsaw, sending red roses. Sending you my kisses and my nostalgia for home.
To his pig pen. Eventually, I told Chuck I wanted something of my mother's. Anything. So we went back to his house.
Must have been chilling, right?
It was chilling. But I know he's not going to kill me. I'm too friggin' mean. We sat down and he opened his little file drawer and pulled out the deed to Mom's land. He held on to it like a frickin' trophy. Of course, it had been sold in probate. You know, no value other than that was a piece of paper that was in her purse. And I got it back. And he didn't get to keep the trophy. After seeing the deed to the land, I started questioning if Chuck's motive was a monetary value. I don't know, maybe he wanted to try and get her livestock, her land, and it was all about the money. They weren't together for love, that's for sure. Several people had made mention that Chuck wanted to take a life insurance policy out on her, which started a big fight in the bar, because he wanted to be the beneficiary, and Mom wanted Paula and I to be the beneficiary. They were only married 9 days, so she really got uncomfortable and really regretted marrying him and really wanted out and wanted him to go away, but he would not go. I had Chuck Anderson's motive, but it felt like it didn't matter. We can never hit the DA if the police don't do their portion. That's it. It's as far as we go. I'm questioning, will we ever see whatever justice is? Chuck Anderson took everything from me. Took everything from my sister Paula. All the things that Paula endured in her years of placement and my mom's death. It even went as far as Paula committing suicide. She was a very troubled person and saw no other way out. I will always think Chuck's responsible for that. In 2001, I was working for a gun scope company, and somebody made mention that they had seen an article written about my mom's death. And in it, they too alluded to suicide. And that was one of my biggest peeves. So I called the Longmont Daily Times and I asked for them to do a retraction. And I waited 7 months before I just had it. And I went into the Longmont Daily Times and I ran into Dee Dee Corral.
There are certain details that I do remember very well.
Right.
Like you storming into the paper, wanting to...
For me, it was, I'm dialing direct.
It's not uncommon for a newspaper to get people coming in who are unhappy with something, and sometimes there is not much to their claims. And in this case, Lisa was fired up, but she also had all the documentation to support her grievance. that the word suicide had been used.
I don't mind you doing an article on my mom, just make it factual. Because if I die, somebody's going to look at this and say, it was suicide.
I would feel the same way. I went through all the reports and corrected some mistakes made in the coverage. And actually, looking back at my notes, I noticed there were a number of contradictions in Charles Anderson's statements against what I knew was in the police reports. The story would not be complete without his version. We had to make the effort to try to talk to him.
I remember you were going to go up there, and I said, don't go out there alone.
I didn't have anyone available at the paper that day to go with me, so I got my dad to go with me. When I arrived, we had some concerns about Mr. Anderson. He had stickers on the outside of his door making sure that everyone knew that he had weapons inside, but we had to make the effort. Mr. Anderson was drinking a beer and watching a show on TV. I think it was The Golden Girls. He invited me in, he was friendly, and he seemed willing to talk. And so I started off by asking him just some questions about the case. Immediately, he began to say things that contradicted what was in the police reports. And finally, at some point, just said, what happened? How did she die? How did she get shot? And that was where he looked up, he looked at me, and he said, well, she didn't shoot herself.